There were plenty of rules established by those in the media when it came to the 2020 election. For example, many weren't going to cover emails this election cycle, acknowledging how they affected the 2016 race. Going into Tuesday night, they were going to play things slow, making sure the results were accurate and brought with them confidence for the American people. To help us better understand if they were successful in that effort, I want to bring on Adam Guillette, the president of the media watchdog group, Accuracy in Media. So, Adam, I think right now Fox News may be the network in the most hot water for its coverage of this election. I think everybody knows that they called Arizona earlier than other networks, and now it is a tightening race. But I want to play what opinion host on Fox News, Tucker Carlson, said about the news division's call of Arizona. Let's take a look.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a great deal of pushback from the president, his staff, the governor of Arizona, apparently more than 1 million ballots still to be counted. I'm not privy to the math. I'm not certain how that, even after the explanation from Chris Direwolf, how that decision was made. So I'm sure there was a reason for it. I don't know what it is. I do know that people are very concerned about the media in general. I think our viewers trust us, but people are concerned. I do know as a factual matter that the claim, and I think I'm quoting now, our pre-election polls were really, really good, is just not true.
So, Adam, as of right now, CNN, MSNBC, they have not called any elections, but Fox News is historically good at this. This is something that they actually have the numbers behind. They put a lot of resources into this. So I want to know what you think. Do you trust the decision by the Fox News decision desk?
Well, it was shocking. They took forever to call Florida. I think they were waiting for every single vote to be counted before they finally called Florida, even though it ended up not being that close. But they jumped the gun incredibly quickly in Arizona. And I was almost wondering, what do the pollsters do on election night? These people who've been wrong on the polls all along, what do they do on election night? I think they call states for the networks. That's the only reasonable explanation.
No, it's an excellent point because, I mean, here we are, and to what Tucker Carlson just said as well, polls were wrong. That is something I think that we can all agree on. I mean, there was a Washington Post ABC poll that said that Wisconsin had Biden up 17. And as of right now, I believe Biden has a 0.5% lead, something like that. So there are a lot of questions. And I know that especially CNN and MSNBC are covering this entire election with a certain degree of caution. But there are some instances when many people are saying that bias is slipping through. So I want to take a look at how CNN's Jim Acosta is handling the race as of this morning and then get your input on the other side. Let's take a look.
Jim, with the state of the race right now, what are you hearing from Republicans?
Yeah, outwardly, Jake, the Trump campaign is saying they're still confident that there's a path that remains. But when you talk to some of these sources privately, you hear a different story. Based on what I'm hearing from my sources, the mood is darkening inside the Trump campaign. Just talked to a source close to the White House a little while ago who said, listen, the president is bleeding GOP support. That's the way this person described it, bleeding GOP support.
So I think that kind of generally sets up what CNN's not only been doing as of recently, but at this election cycle as well. But as I was saying, there is a degree of caution that they're trying to exercise this time around. Even leading up to election night, they were really making it a point to say, we may not know the results on election night. Everybody hold the phone. So do you think that the more left-leaning networks have learned their lessons from the 2016 election?
No, they haven't learned their lessons. They'll never learn their lessons. And they're repeating opposite versions now of the mistakes they've made previously. They've made so many mistakes that they've actually lapped themselves in the mistake department. Previously, in the last election, they latched onto the Russia hoax, which turned out to be a baseless charge. Now they're leveling the claim of baseless charges against voter fraud when there might actually be voter fraud. To suggest that there's a little bit of bias and that some of it is trickling through is like suggesting that the water at Niagara Falls trickles through. They're nothing but biased. They'll never learn, and they're trying to placate and entertain a left-wing audience.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, too. We'll get to the media bias a little bit later and where they go from here, regardless of who wins in the election. But, I mean, it's something that I think, regardless of what happens, the American people are taking something away from this race when it comes to the media. They see through a lot of this, and I don't think the media likes to give the average American credit for being smarter than they are, because they see, for example, when they don't want to cover something, when there's sketchy things going on, but the media won't even talk about it. But I want to focus on pollsters right now, because we were just talking about this as well. Regardless of what the media learned from 2016, it looks like pollsters have not learned anything. They've once again been completely off. And Frank Luntz, for example, said that modern-day polling is dead. And now he's issuing an apology to those who were demonized for their numbers. I want to take a look at what he said. Here he is.
Frankly, and I want to do this publicly, I owe an apology to John McLaughlin, who is Donald Trump's pollster. he reported privately that Trump was leading in all these swing states by roughly a point, maybe 2 points. And in the end, even if Biden wins those states, John was closer than any of these heralded published polls that we see in the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN. And in the end, we have to believe in accountability in the polling profession, in the political profession, even in yours, in the media profession. The public has the right to accountability, and we.
So, Adam, in the lead up to this election, the Nate Silvers of the world and the Frank Luntz of the world were saying that Trafalgar, for example, was a hack polling practice. They were making fun of John McLaughlin, as he just said right there, really saying that these pollsters who are coming closer to the actual results, they were saying pretty despicable things about them, really taking shots at their credibility. And now it looks like they were actually closer than a lot of these big polling organizations. So what do you think? Is polling dead?
I think Frank Luntz just showed us the difference between propaganda and an honest mistake. For Luntz to come out and say, we've made errors, shows a tremendous degree of class in his part. And I understand that errors are going to happen in journalism. But when these other outlets make the errors again, and again, and don't even stop to apologize before they once again make quote unquote mistakes for the left, is outrageous. We've spent decades exposing media bias. Distrust in media, thanks to our work, and it is at an all-time high. But we need to understand now, we need to remember that the focus is merely shifting. People realize the media is biased. We now need to educate them about the new media outlets with their bias, and of course, the terrible social media bias out there.
I think you're exactly right. Let's give credit where it's due. I mean, admitting mistakes nowadays is easier said than done. I do give Frank Luntz credit for doing that because, for example, Nate Silver is not doing that. He is saying that, you know what, but when this is all said and done, it's going to be pretty close. Polling overall is not that bad. I mean, I understand why he's saying that because he's dependent on that industry, but I don't think anybody can look at the polls this election cycle and say, you know what? They were close. They learned from the 2016 mistakes. I think that whole argument goes out the window. But I want to move on to what is also taking place because MSNBC has been covering protests outside of the Maricopa County Election Department, and they've been framing those demonstrations as violent or at the very least aggressive. And I saw a lot on social media, a lot of people saying this is an exact type of parallel that we're talking about between what protests were like earlier in the summer and then what they're calling right now to be aggressive protests. So I want to play that coverage really quickly. Let's play the clip.
They've got some sheriff's officers up that are blocking the entrance of the election center. We're going to walk this way here.
Stand up and to make sure we're fighting for what's right.
And one of the things that we've seen is right now they're kneeling in prayer, but one of the things that we've seen is them chanting very loudly, "Count that vote, count that vote."
So it's hard to hear there, but he calls that crowd at one point throughout the night aggressive and then says right there that they were kneeling in prayer outside of the Maricopa County Elections Department. But I saw many people on social media comparing this coverage to the riots that took place over the summer. You may remember that they were saying mostly peaceful protests minus some fires, things of that nature. But regardless of the outcome of the race, what happens to the media from here? Do you think that the American people take away with the idea that there is bias and there are going to be consequences for some of these media networks?
Well, we've spent decades exposing it. If you look at the numbers, the American people recognize they're being lied to again and again and again by these networks. They don't necessarily realize they're getting lied to by the newer outlets like BuzzFeed or Now This that go after impressionable viewers. They don't necessarily realize they're getting lied to when they tune into ESPN and Max Kellerman says that the violent riots have been started by the right wingers. But I think the average American, if they pull out the New York Times, if they flip over and see MSNBC, when they see CNN say that they're fiery but peaceful protests, and they see the fires with their own eyes, and then conversely see people in prayer, and that's described as violence, the American people are far too smart to be fooled by those lies.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up ESPN because if you just watch a Keith Olbermann clip nowadays, I mean, I
try not to.
It's unhinged. I mean, it actually is quite alarming. This is someone who, I don't like to say stuff like this, but he does need help. Someone needs to talk to Keith Olbermann because he's quite literally talking about locking up people who disagree with his views of that nature. I mean, it's a weird time that we're living in.
Unhinged should be the title of his show.
you know what? He might take you up on that. Now, once again, I don't want to give him any ideas or anything like that because he seems to be going every direction but the right one. So I'll keep an eye on him. I know you will too at your organization. You guys are doing a great job. Adam Guillette, I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight, breaking down this election coverage because in ways it's just as important as the results itself. This is the warfare for information taking place and you're on the front lines. I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.